Hello, everyone, and welcome to a much-delayed episode of Dungeon Master of None. I'm Dungeon Master Rob.
I'm Dungeon Master Matt, where we will explain nothing and apologize for nothing for not putting out an episode for 2 weeks.
We have nothing to be ashamed of, and we will never apologize. Though, Matt, if you did want to talk about one of the things that you were working on while we were away, do you want to use this time to plug your AP History thing? I think you should.
Sure, yeah. So if you like gaming and you like history, check out the Great Lakes History Conference. It's in October up in beautiful Grand Rapids, Michigan, home of Amway, Gerald Ford, and Eric Prince. Great figures in our history. And the theme of the conference this year is gaming and simulations in history. So if you've ever had an idea for teaching history through gaming, whether it's video games, board games, or some sort of role-playing game, this is the academic conference for you.
I'm sure it's going to be great. And now it is more important than ever to defend the integrity of the historical profession, right, Matt? Right?
Absolutely. In fact, we have like an interest who has a role-playing game set during the Haitian Revolution. I have no idea whether it's going to be cool or not, but I'm super excited to find out. So, there's a call for papers. We'll link it in the episode notes. So submit your stuff.
I'm not so
history is under attack.
Not so subtly trying to get you to talk about the Save AP World thing.
Oh yeah. So this awful nonprofit that controls our national education system is trying to cut out all of the medieval and ancient history that we hold so dear, that inspires most of our gaming settings, and 300,000 kids a year learn about this through AP World History, and they want to start the course in the year 1450 with gunpowder and no more swords and no more sorcery. So
not 1453 with the fall of Constantinople, as is tradition.
Yes, right. They might as well make it that, right?
They might as well make it that and just, go back to the way things were. Anyway, we don't ever plug Matt's other podcast, but he has another podcast on top of the world history. Sorry. On Top of the World,
a world history podcast. It's a even more nerdy podcast than this one. It's about teaching history and history pedagogy. So if you're a history teacher,
or if you're concerned about this particular issue, which you should be, because our historical education is already abysmal, listen to, I guess, the most recent episode, right, Matt? And
yeah, that's right. Though by the time this comes out, the most recent episode will be about the Tupac Amaru rebellion in Andean South America.
Ooh, awesome. We'll link the episode. This is important to both of us as historians, and it is already bad enough the way that historical education is in the United States without, reducing the scope. So be aware of that. But anyway, that's enough.
Rob, you need to submit a paper. You have a job. You don't need a grant to come.
Okay.
You should write a paper about gaming and history and
I actually have something for that. Let me remind me after the podcast.
Of course you do. You just have a gaming and history paper in your back pocket.
Well, I have notes for something like that. This is obviously. Anyway, so yeah, I'll submit a paper. Matt, are you actually going to be?
We can be on an academic panel together.
That'd be great. Exciting. When is the conference? We'll be submitting papers. If you live in or near Grand Rapids, go hassle Matt and possibly me and enjoy a academic discussion of gaming.
The Great Lakes History Conference begins October 12th through October the 13th in beautiful downtown Grand Rapids, and you can see our keynote speaker. I forget who it is. Someone important. Last year we had Michelle Moyd, who is a great historian of World War I in East Africa. So if you ever wanted to know about, fucking Germans and British, and by that we mean East Africans and Indians fighting in Tanganyika, she's an amazing historian.
Awesome. So, enough waffling, enough plugging. Let's get down to what we have been wanting to talk about.
Let's get down to brass tacks. Let's get down to wooden stakes.
Wooden stakes. That's right. Brass tacks, iron filings, crosses over the door, garlic. That's right. Running water, sunlight. We are talking about Curse of Strahd. Wempier. As real DM of None heads will know, I recently wrapped up a yearish long Curse of Strahd campaign that Matt and some of my other friends were playing in, and we wanted to do a sort of a breakdown and talk about this particular module and what's good about it and what's bad about it. Curse of Strahd is a traditional like OD&D module. I think it was from like the early 80s, somewhere in there. One of the originals that was revamped for 5th edition and kept most of its character with some mechanical and flavor updates.
Right. Curse of Strahd has a really long history in Dungeons and Dragons in that the inspiration from it goes all the way back to a module by Tracy and Laura Hickman, your favorite Mormon fantasy authors. Which they wrote.
You ever wanted to read books with no sex in them? They're your people.
A lot of possible tension.
Yes.
Going towards sex, but never actually getting there.
That's right.
Books with zero fucking.
If you love your fantasy books where everybody is wearing secret underwear, then they're actually not bad. I mean,
no, they're worse.
They hold up okay. Like the books are all right. It's just going back and reading some of the stuff that we read as kids is just like very sterile. Anyway.
Yeah, and it's I think they had a original like module that they wrote. I think it was called like Rahasim or something like that back in like 86. So like when Rob and I were being born.
Yes.
And it has some of the elements of Ravenloft. It has a sort of a damsel in distress and an evil master of that, and they took that and they made a whole Ravenloft box set, which brought in some new writers, and that was in like 1990. But there's been in Dungeon Magazine and Dragon Magazine sort of reboots of Ravenloft and other additions to it. And as Rob says, now there's a 5th edition adventure path.
Right. And so the key thing here is that Curse of Strahd is sort of the flagship Ravenloft module. So if it is, so Ravenloft is no longer its own distinct setting, or it's not in 5th edition, but it was for a while sort of a creepy gothic horror setting for D&D that had its own, like Matt said, its own box set and its own setting rules. Now it's sort of in the 5th edition module, it's its own pocket universe, which sort of cleverly sidesteps the issue of having to create an actual new setting.
So in this, you'll get the stuff from Castle Ravenloft plus a bunch of other things, but you won't get the whole setting of an entire world that is all Transylvanian horror.
Well, if you wanted to, you could extrapolate from like what is in Curse of Strahd to do that, but it's not given to you the way that it was. So anyway, the point is that Ravenloft has a long storied history. Curse of Strahd does in Dungeons and Dragons, and this is the most recent iteration of it. So elements of this particular module are, in some cases, like Matt said, older than we are. And that's sort of neat, and it holds up pretty well. The adaptation, and I've already forgotten who did the adaptation, but they did a great job.
I think it was Bruce Cordell and someone else important. Crawford, maybe?
I think it was Crawford. So yeah, they adapted it, and it was a great, very unique module. It was very fun for me to run. Perkins, that's right. Very fun for me to run. It is, I think, also maybe like one of the more challenging, like full-on modules to run. Matt, you read through it, you played through it. What are your thoughts now that you've sat behind the DM screen a little bit and read through the actual game mastery side?
So we're going to take the same approach to this as we did to talking about Kingmaker in our earlier episode. And Ravenloft is, I think, something that is not just a module. It's basically an entire campaign, right? You got to set aside a minimum of 6 months, probably more like a year if you're a person who has any kind of normal schedule. As a player, I have to say I absolutely loved it. You have to be completely bought in to playing a creepy horror game, but if you are bought into that, then you're gonna have a blast solving mysteries and dealing with sort of gothic horror, every single trope, from making Frankenstein's monsters to werewolves to vampires to evil witches in swamps.
Yeah, there were. I am not like a like a fang wearing, cape wearing, like goth nerd or anything like that, and so I didn't lean particularly hard on the horror side of this. But there were times when my players were like visibly repulsed by some of the things that were going on in the campaign, which is by design, and it's one of the testaments to how fun and how like creepy and powerful and like well written this particular campaign is. And it also emphasizes that sometimes it can be, a little bit like goofy and also kind of like too much. It's very campy in like a very well done way. You're encouraged to be campy, and Strahd is like the campiest of camp villains, even if you play him completely straight.
Yeah, I mean, he's so this is a great example of how to build a campaign, in that on the one hand, and we'll talk about this, it's a sandbox campaign, but on the other hand, it's very much here is the villain. You know who the villain is from day one, really. And it's that is your final confrontation. That's a great way to build a campaign. Put it all out there for the players.
I love this about Curse of Strahd. We talked about this in Kingmaker, which is one of the major flaws of Kingmaker, is that you don't know who the villain is until
you're like right there. Oh, you're like, oh, you were the person behind this? Well, how would we have ever known? You killed that unicorn at level 2?
But yeah, that's right. Oh god, I forgot about the unicorn.
Right.
Yes, of course, we're supposed to catch the hint that that unicorn means something. But yeah, there's different schools of thought, but it is cool in Strahd that you know right away who the villain is, and you have this constant reminder. He is designed to show up repeatedly throughout the campaign and remind you that he's there to like toy with your players. It is such a cool way to establish a villain and a goal, and to provide things for your players to be against and to fear and to work. It builds like my players were all about going after Strahd by the time, like, after he had bothered them enough times and like taunted them and killed people they cared about. They were ready to fucking go, and if you run it right, it can be very, very satisfying.
Yeah, Strahd is a satisfying villain, and the entire campaign is built around them without providing any spoilers other than what your players, if you do end up playing this, will know by the end of the first session, is that the entire campaign is set in a fairly small valley that is completely controlled by the vampire. We've asked ourselves in other episodes of this, isn't it fun to set up a campaign world where, what if the villains have won? And Strahd has, almost total control over this horrible nightmare land. It's perfect for a vampire. There's no sunlight. Everyone is either one of his spies or servants, or is too afraid to act out against him. And no one really has any hope in sight of what a world without a evil vampire ruling over them might look like.
It's fully under his control. Strahd is unassailable. Has almost demigod-like powers. There's ghosts of like past adventurers that march out of the graveyard every night.
Great. Like,
because of
you're doomed. Go back.
How many people have come to try to kill him and failed? It's so like oppressively in his control, and you arrive here and are given like just enough to work with and have to sort of like find the tools to challenge Strahd. And it is possible to lose to him. If your players can just like march up to the castle anytime they want and get killed. It has happened before, but
The game sets it up where because you meet all of these, it's put into the backstory of the campaign and the world your players interact with that lots of people have tried to do just what you're doing. If your players do end up failing, as Rob suggested, it still makes for a satisfying ending to the campaign, at least from my perspective as a player who did not fail. In that, okay, we were just another in a long line of adventurers that done fucked up.
Matt is right about what he said, is that it does require buy-in. You know, your players have to be like, yes, this is the campaign that I'm playing and these are the stakes. But if they understand the type of game that they're playing, it can be very, very fun and very challenging and rewarding. But it definitely requires... It's not a low investment game in terms of role playing and in terms of, you know, committing to the bit. You have to sort of like, you know, realize what you're doing and play into it. And that's fine for... I guess it might be rough for some like first time role players. I was going to get to this and we will get to this, but I would absolutely not recommend this campaign for an inexperienced DM or inexperienced players. I think it's a relatively advanced campaign from both sides.
Well, last thing before we do a deep dive into the nitty-gritty of this adventure published campaign is that the one thing I really liked about the campaign is there's a lot of vampires out there in popular culture, though we're definitely on the downward slope of vampire popularity.
Thank God.
But Strahd is a cool vampire in that it's more like a original Legend of Dracula vampire. He's not a vampire that is like an underworld vampire that got his vampirism from being passed on by some other sexy vampire that made him to a vampire. Like, he's a vampire because he made a pact with dark entities, right? In that sort of a deal with the devil kind of thing. And that's
he's got that kind of vampire power and charisma that's the old kind, you know, so old and so powerful that, you know, more than just being immortal and drinking blood and being able to turn into bats, like he can, you know, influence people's minds and, you know, control like reality to a certain degree and has, you know, powerful magic. I made him well, we'll come back around to this, but he's a wizard originally, but I made him a sorcerer because of, you know, I thought that fit very well with his type of power and his backstory. But yeah, he's such like a classic vampire, a powerful vampire in the vein of, like Matt said, Legend of Dracula type stuff.
Yeah. It's less of a true blood. My purpose is to sate my hunger for blood and move up in a hierarchy of vampires, in that I'm an evil person who has made a pact with dark powers.
Right.
So I think I think we can both say overall that we really like the module, and that if you're interested in doing a sort of classic Gothic horror campaign, you know, you don't really have to look any further.
I don't know that you could possibly do better. If you're at all interested in Gothic horror, if you're even interested in just sort of a unique style of game, this is definitely something to look into. Most people agree that this is one of 5th edition's better campaigns. It's definitely one of the, I don't know, top 3 easily.
All right, let's take a quick break and dive into some of the details of 5th edition's Curse of Strahd.
The world is a vampire sent to drain secret destroyers. Hold you up to the flames. And what do I get for my pain? Betrayed desires and a piece of the
Okay, let's talk about Rob. Tell me about the beginning of this adventure, and we should note if you are perhaps going to be a player in this will probably be the part of the episode that has spoilers for the campaign.
Well, we are going to try to keep this relatively spoiler free, but just be aware that there will be some. But the beginning is super cool. It's again, there's a lot we've talked about, like how complicated it is to start a campaign and how to get player buy-in. And Curse of Strahd is an old style module in that it makes it pretty simple for you. Basically, all your players need is a reason to be on the Sword Coast. There are a bunch of different ways to end up in Barovia. where, you know, the campaign takes place, and you can give them as much or as little agency as you like. One of the options that is given for DMs is...
Right, they give you about 5 options.
They give you 5 options, which I like. And I gave my players one of them, which I think they enjoyed. I had them think of a reason why they would be at a certain noblewoman's party, and after the party, they encountered a Vistani storyteller who, I think they gave you a letter or something like that, and then you went with him and ended up going through the mists and ended up in Barovia. But if you don't want to give your players any agency, you can just, one of the options is you are enveloped by a strange mist, and then you wake up in Barovia, which is, a little bullshit, but also, stories begin like that sometimes. And that's a totally, valid way to
great
start the
fairy
campaign.
tale beginning. I think the one thing you have to make sure that you do with your players in this type of story is let them know that wherever you start the campaign, and the default option is, again, in Forgotten Realms for some god-awful reason, right? But it could be in your own homebrew world or any other world. You need to tell them that none of the actual campaign will take place in this world, so your connections to whatever campaign setting that is not Barovia will not matter in the actual play of the campaign. It could matter for your backstory or your interaction with the other player characters. And you should let them know that the beginning of the campaign involves them traveling to a mystic and terrible land. And that's not something players... I think you should just do that out of play and let players know that, yes, you're going to get taken away to Barovia, and that's a good thing. Don't try and fight that, because I could see there's players being like, hey, I don't want to go there, right? That's a logical thing not to want.
Yes,
but there's no way to avoid that unless you don't want to play this campaign.
Right, and this is one of the reasons
that's
why
a little awkward.
It is awkward.
Warning for DMs,
right? Requires buy-in and understanding, and possibly some slightly more advanced role players is just, being able to be mature and say, look, yes, I know that you have a sister in Waterdeep and you're very close with her and whatever, but that's not important. You have to accept that's not going to be important to this campaign. And if your players don't like that, then this isn't the campaign for them, and that's fine. You also, this is something we've talked about in other episodes, but this is a great one to be hey, go watch some vampire movies. Read Bram Stoker's Dracula. Read that awesome book, The Historian. Did you read that, Matt? The one where it's super cool. It's a historian traces down Vlad the Impaler's vampiric lineage. It's a fiction book. Anyway, so this is one of those.
I don't believe historians should ever be heroes of novels. We're way too lame for that. I will never read this book.
It's a good book. But yeah, this is a great one to give them some media to establish what kind of campaign it is. They don't have to pick I'm a Van Helsing type fighter. You don't have to lean into all the stereotypes, but they should know that it is a gothic horror campaign.
It's almost better if your players don't
Yes.
pick something like I'm a Van Helsing type, because this is a campaign from level 1 to level 10. There are opportunities for players and NPCs that might be willing to train them to become a Van Helsing type. And let's be honest, Van Helsing, under no one's imagination, is a level 1 character, right? Level 1 characters are not experienced vampire hunters, right? But, if you wanted to make a character who had lost a loved one to some sort of undead or other gothic horror monster, is interested in learning how to hunt them, that is a good idea for a character.
And Curse of Strahd gives you a bunch of tables to roll on to establish sort of a little bit of gothic horror flavor, this is a thing that's happened to you, or this is an attachment that you have, or this is, just a little twist on your character that, helps tie you into the setting or tie you into the theme. This is a very thematic campaign, in case we haven't made that clear. So much room in the book is devoted to things that mechanically don't really make any difference, but help establish the tone and mood and theme of the campaign, which I valued greatly, and I think was one of the reasons why it makes it so good. But yes, you need to be very upfront with your players about what kind of game it is, where that they will not be in the place that they came from, and that there is it is sandboxy, but also at the same time, certain elements are very railroady.
Yeah.
And
to some, right, to both players and DMs, make sure that they don't make characters that are really want to or need to interact with some other campaign setting, right? Make characters that enjoy interacting with the other player characters, or, you know, growing in their own right. And if you don't have players who you feel like you can trust to buy into, you are swept away to a distant land and there's nothing you can do with it about it, definitely lean into that one option in the game where it's like you're all traveling on the road, you're talking to each other, and then you're swept away. That's how the beginning of the campaign, before you even get a chance to do anything, right? That's a good way to get around that. Shall we talk about the first couple levels of the campaign, how it starts off?
Yes, this is super cool. I liked this a lot. It's not how I generally do things, but I thought this was so interesting, and I wanted to stick to it. But the first 3 levels take place in a single house, Death House. It's sort of like its own mini adventure, and it is very intense. It is potentially very deadly. And it's a great introduction to the Curse of Strahd setting. You can skip it. One of the options is you can just have your players start at level 3, which is totally viable. But Death House is just like such a good way to get everybody warmed up for the Curse of Strahd's, like, just the theme and tone and the setting and the way that the game is run.
Yeah, just the way you interact with the world, this mini adventure sets the tone, right? In that, oh, there's ghosts, and if I touch this thing, this bad thing will happen, and this is a curse, and there's nothing I can do to, you know, get out of this type of thing, right? It's very much tells you how the world is going to work.
Yeah, there's traps and poison, and if I pick up the wrong object, I might be ambushed by shadows, and, you know, there are things that are way too powerful for me, and if
I should run away from. Yes,
that I should run away from. If the party is not careful, that they could die. So
this is a great example of how to show and not tell the tone of your campaign, because I could imagine if you were writing a gothic horror campaign, you might want to write up 2 pages of text that you read to your players at the beginning, telling them how everything is dark and scary, but why not just show them?
Yeah, Curse of Strahd is great for environmental storytelling. It does like such a good job of your players find a painting or a coin or a book. And, like, the more thorough they are in searching and the more interested they are in the setting around them, the more they will learn. At certain points in the campaign, NPCs will sit them down and say, yes, Strahd, blah, 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 here's his backstory. But they can piece it together bit by bit from things they find as they're adventuring and exploring. And Death House is just a great introduction to that. There's a bunch of, like, little things that will tell you about Strahd, that will tell you about the setting, that will tell you about the people that you will eventually meet. The story of Death House itself is incredibly, like, gothic and creepy. There's no one's going to tell you. There's no, like, living people in Death House. So your players have to try to figure it out or just ignore it entirely, which is totally viable. There are plenty of stories that are in the campaign that your players probably will never encounter, and that's okay.
This is a campaign where there are things you can easily skip over, right? Whether it's wise to skip over them or not, depends on how things shake out. But in the other part of the start of the campaign, after you do this little mini module, you're thrust into, now that you've got the tone down, you're thrust into the world of Barovia, which is full of people with bad Eastern European accents and names, and oppressively gloomy. Everyone's a peasant, mud folk. It's a great introduction to, you're in this shitty land and there's no way out.
It's interesting also because it's extremely railroady, and then it immediately opens up into a complete sandbox, a small sandbox, but a complete sandbox with basically your players can go and do anything that they want. And so I think it's a good juxtaposition. It's a little bit like training wheels for Curse of Strahd, which is why I like to run it, because even for experienced role players, it's good to, like, establish tone and lethality and mood, and I think it does a really good job of that.
That's how it works. It establishes tones and then gives your players sandbox. You're in a scary gothic world, and it's really exciting to explore the Valley of Barovia for the first couple levels and see what's out there. Any critiques? I think I have a few for how the game, this campaign begins, adjustments dungeon masters might want to make.
It is very railroady. It is very, it's just like extremely rigid, and it requires your players to be patient with the fact that they're just being told this is where you have to go. And that's not always fun, and while I generally like it for this, it's not for everybody, and it isn't particularly well done, in my opinion, but I think the strength of the opening makes up for it. But it is pretty, like, your players are told what to do, and they don't really have any choice in the matter.
My critique, again, coming from a player's side, is I absolutely loved Death House and would have been absolutely fine if one of the things actually killed my player character. I almost died many times, but did not. My one critique, and this is not a major one, but I've had this same critique ever since back in 2nd edition. Remember when Drow weapons and armors melted into smoke in the sunlight?
Oh, yes. That is a good critique, yeah. I hate
it when players get something and then something pretty arbitrary that they had no idea knowing about takes it away from them. And in Death House, there's not any valuable treasure, like no real valuable treasure at all, just like a few mundane weapons and items, rope, chains, which when you're level 1, players should value picking those things up because they probably only have a few utility items like that. And everything you find in Death House, and again, spoilers, disappears when you leave Death House. And I hate it when campaigns do that to players. There's no point to it, and it makes them angry. It especially makes me angry.
If I ran it again, I would have there be some treasure that didn't melt away. Yes. But yeah, your players will come out of Death House 2 levels higher, but not with any considerable loot that doesn't immediately fade into nothingness, and that is frustrating.
The other thing about Death House is it sets up some sort of a weird nobility of Barovia. And while it conveys to players the tone exactly right, I assumed wrongly from playing through Death House that the plot of this version of Curse of Strahd would have some kind of like scheming nobles that Strahd has below him that you are going to have to make some deals with and navigate your way through. And there's some of that in Curse of Strahd, but I was fooled by that, and maybe that was a misconception on my part.
Yeah, they put I also had this issue. I ran it straight, but there's a lot of emphasis put on this noble family from Death House, and then they never
they don't fucking matter at all.
They don't matter at all.
Is there a way to like replace them with something that might matter? And that's the thing about campaigns. Not everything has to matter later, but maybe it should.
Yeah, no, you absolutely could replace them with something that matters. But especially at the very beginning, your players are hyper aware of everything, and they're like, "Oh, this is a hint. This is valuable. Like, I need to know this. I'm going to take notes on this weird family." And then they never come back. So I think Matt's correct here. Like, yeah, it doesn't have to matter, but it would be good if I can already think of like a bunch of ways to tie them into an existing noble family or into Strahd's history in a way that makes at least like some difference.
Like maybe Lady Wachtern or something like that.
Right, like they could be like related to Lady Wachtern or something like that. That's an easy one. Or the Vlakoviches in Vallaki.
Yeah. There's a lot of Vitches in this.
A lot of Vitches.
A lot of messy Vitches who love horror.
Love horror drama.
Open up the champagne, pop. It's my house, come on, turn it up. Hear a knock on the door and the night begins. Cause we've done this before, so you come on in. Make yourself at my home, tell me where you been. Pour yourself something cold.
Let's talk about the
middle of the campaign, I want to talk about the sandbox,
the sandbox nature of it, because we keep saying this. And
let's get sandy.
This is just like so super cool. So the way that it works, and this is just like a mild spoiler, this happens within like the first 2 sessions, but early on, your players, unless they're being real dumb, should encounter a Vistani fortune teller, Madame Eva, who will draw tarot cards. Basically, tarot cards. I forget what they're actually called. Taroka in Barovia.
Just call them tarot cards. There's no reason to call them Taroka.
Anyway, this is really cool. Based on the cards that are drawn, it will tell you 5 things. It will tell you where one of 3 treasures that will help you defeat Strahd are, where your ally is, or his enemy is, and this is a random NPC somewhere in Barovia who you can find and use to help you defeat Strahd, and then finally where he will be in his castle when you finally encounter him. And this is so super cool because you can run this campaign a dozen times and it would be different every single time. You can, if you want, put your hand on the scale and adjust where the treasures will be, or you can just let the cards fall where they may. But what it does is it gives your players just enough of a framework. These are the places I need to go to find the things I need to defeat Strahd, but it doesn't tell them in which order to go or how to go about it, or really like what any of these things are, mechanically, until they actually find and learn about them. It's so super cool. I love this mechanic.
Yeah, it's great in that all the things in there can eventually be found by the players if they're doing their due diligence and really engaging in the world. But having those clues at the beginning is super helpful, and the fun of the randomness is great. If your players are not good and they get a bad tarot reading, it can be difficult, right? But that's kind of the fun. You can
end up with all of these treasures in Strahd's castle, and which can be a nightmare if your players aren't prepared for that. Be aware that if you're going to do it fully randomly, it can be very bad, but this is one of the very cool things about the campaign.
And then the sandboxy feel is you've got just a plethora of horror tropes spread throughout the Valley of Barovia. On one end, you have, pretty much from the beginning where your final boss is, right? It's not like Castle Ravenloft, where Strahd lives, is hidden somewhere.
It's literally right there. You can see it the moment you step out of Death House. You see the castle, and it is ever present. It's impossible to miss.
But your players know there's no way they can fight Strahd, right? They know that they need some help and, of course, experience and leveling up so they're not so squishy. And then throughout the valley, you've got sort of your typical fantasy town. You've got really 2 fun ones. You've got the shittier place of Barovia, and you've got the nicer town of Vallaki, and there's all kinds of urban adventures there. You meet a full gamut of horror NPCs from, Van Helsing-like witch hunters to some lycanthrope creatures that are ambiguous possible allies, to some creepy horror druids, to an angel in disguise, to, of course, a classic dungeon crawl full of dark powers. It's got a lot of things. Even a witch.
Did you already mention the stitched together Frankenstein monster?
Oh, the stitched together Frankenstein monster with Isle of Dr. Monroe lackeys. And so I think the NPCs that are not Strahd really sell this campaign, because when you think about it, right, you got your sort of intro at the beginning of your opening of the sandbox of the Death House. You have the end of the campaign is going to be your final confrontation with Strahd, but most of your playtime with your friends sitting around the table is going to be exploring this valley. And if the meat of that is not fun, then the campaign is not fun, no matter how exciting the beginning and end are. But the meat of the campaign is really a lot of fun.
Matt's, the NPCs are really good, and they're all also so flawed and tragic and corrupted. Even the good ones are, the noble ones are usually doomed in one way or another, or prone to failure, and the evil ones are corrupt in a very very human way. They're all dealing with the oppressive gloom of Barovia in equally distressingly bad methods, and
everyone sucks. So when you meet someone who only sucks a little bit, you're so happy to meet just a person who's halfway decent.
And this is one of the things that is very very interesting.
Oh,
and
you also don't eat babies? Wow. Do you want to join our party?
This is one of the things that is interesting, but for me also like sort of challenging, is there's a lot of NPCs that are intended to travel with and work closely with the PCs. I mean, this can easily wander into DM PC territory if you're not careful, but it's written into the module, and in some cases it is very important that these NPCs be with the party. And so this is, again, not an insurmountable challenge, but it is one of the things that makes running this as a DM kind of hard, because not only is it, you don't want them to steal too much thunder, but it slows down combat, and it can be a distraction, and not all of these NPCs are like especially well fleshed out, so you are often having to fill in a lot of stuff yourself if your players have a lot of questions, which they probably will. Again, this is a welcome challenge and something that I enjoyed a lot, but it is definitely something that the DM is going to have to work towards. The sandbox nature of this means that you are given a lot of tools, but oftentimes a lot of this is shallow. Some of the towns have just like the barest minimum. I mean, they're all like poor dirt towns, so they don't have anything, but your players may like want to know more, and you're going to have to try to figure out what's going on your own in a lot of cases.
Yeah, it's sad in that the worst NPCs are the ones that tend to be around the player characters the most. If I was running this, I would definitely try and come up with some kind of home base for the players, whether it's like a magical carriage that is bigger on the inside than the outside or something that they can just sort of stash all their NPCs in so they can talk to them and they can help them cook dinner and stuff, but they don't have to go climb around the ruins of Argynvostholt with them because, yeah, like Rob said, they can really slow down combat. But sometimes they have really important information.
Because they're not like often, outside of a couple of exceptions, not built for like high-end combat, so... this is another, so yeah, I like the home base idea. This is something that I would do differently if I ran this again. Not only having like a home base, like somewhere where, NPCs can stay until they're safe or players can go back to, but also there is no, this is a very poor area, and there's basically nothing for your players to spend their money on, which is like not a huge deal, but like there is so much treasure in Curse of Strahd, like a lot of very interesting and valuable treasure, and your players will be like walking around with 10,000 gold pieces and nothing to spend it on. And other people have written up suggestions for traveling merchants. I eventually had the Vistani open up their traveling caravan of wares to the players at the end. I wish I had done that earlier on. But again, that's part of the issue of like not going back to the same place. But yeah, if I were going to run this again, I would come up with some sort of solution, some sort of magic shop that appears maybe halfway through the campaign, something that makes sense.
You can't give players just tons of gold and not have anything to spend it on, because not only are there no like magic weapons or things that actual adventurers want to buy, but there's no sort of other opportunities to spend your gold. You can't start building a keep. That's not something Strahd is going to let you do. Right. Though that might be an interesting subplot.
That would be fun. But yeah, if your players like start a tavern, like it seems pretty likely that Strahd will burn it down or something. One of the cool things about this is that it establishes also Strahd is not a passive villain waiting in his tower. Like, he is engaging with the players. He has motivations. He wants something from them.
Right. He is so incredibly bored that he's really happy they're there.
Yes.
Deep down.
He's super excited. He's given a bunch of reasons. Like, maybe one of the players can succeed him or challenge him or is interesting to him in a sort of a rivalry way.
Like a cat would view a cricket that is loose on your floor.
Yes,
he is very enthralled with the player characters.
So he'll toy with you, but if you rise too high or ignore him or do something that he doesn't like, then he can respond quite aggressively. But it's cool that he's not just lurking in his tower waiting for you to come to him. He is very. Not like super active, but he will remind the players of his existence quite frequently, which is one of the cool things about the campaign.
Any favorite sandbox locations of yours now that you've run it, Rob, of the expanse of the Valley of Barovia?
Yes, I really did like the Abbey of Saint Markovia. That was a very what was great about that is like it wasn't super important. There wasn't anything critical there, but it was very creepy. There was a lot of stuff going on. There are some like significant and interesting NPCs, and yeah, it's a great like horror location. I liked that a lot. That was not a critical place, but a very creepy and very interesting one to me to run.
Yeah, mine by far had to be, and it's probably going to be a part of later in the campaign, but the Amber Temple.
Yeah, I also like the Amber Temple a lot.
Very deadly, high-level dungeon, and, just even from people who've played the old Castle Ravenloft module, I have after completing it, swapped stories with other players about the Amber Temple.
Yeah,
it presents some interesting player dilemmas.
Yeah, a lot of these old style dungeon crawls don't hold up, Matt, but this one does. It is very deadly, and it can kind of be a grind, and it can be frustrating because there's like a lot of levers and secret words and things, and if you don't have the right tools, you can just get stuck. But it is a very interesting. I liked it a lot. It was very fun to run. I think it lasted like the exact right amount of time. We were there for about 3 sessions, and by the end, everyone had gotten a bunch of powerful loot, learned a lot of interesting things, and were ready to. I think that was right before you left to go fight Stahd. So
yeah, it could definitely last 5 or 6 sessions, and if it lasts any more than that, your players might have a rebellion as they want to get out of this dungeon and back into the world and interact with all their favorite NPCs and stuff like that. I have to say my least favorite of the sandbox things is there's a thing that is like once a bastion of good. There's a land of evil, and you're like, oh, this is a place where there was once good people. And you go there, and it's kind of anticlimactic in that you can't really defeat the thing that is there. And your reward for learning about the sort of curse over this place of good is that something doesn't happen, which, while this makes perfect sense in the plot, is pretty unrewarding for players because something not happening is hard to see in terms of a role-playing game, right? It's much better if you can make it into something positive as opposed to the removal of a negative. Does that make sense? I'm talking about Argynvostholt, in case anyone's looking.
No, I get it. And Argynvostholt is great because it is anticlimactic, and it is disappointing because it is like one of the few places that's like a bastion of good, and you get there and there's very little for you to do. Everyone has fallen so far.
Maybe that's by design.
Yeah, one of the more interesting places.
And I see things mighty clear today. I'm alive. I'm alive. And I'm breathing clean fresh air today. I'm alive. I'm alive. Who cares? My hair's
all right, we gotta talk about the end of this campaign.
Yeah, I want to talk about a few more things. I want to talk briefly about like what makes this. Now that we've talked about Sandbox, like what makes this so difficult for a DM, and what to be aware of is that because NPCs interact so broadly and have all these interactions with different parts of the game, and there are all these events that happen. You have to really have read the module, read the campaign, like front to back. Possibly twice. Like at least 2 or 3 times.
And made your own notes? Yes. I imagine you had to have a web of things.
I did. I was lucky that I did this in Roll20, and it made there were a bunch of like interlinks that made this very easy. But even then I had a bunch of notes, and had trouble. There were times when I was not ready and I missed some things. It didn't affect the campaign, but there were definitely things that were supposed to happen that I completely was like not prepared for. And yeah, this is extremely difficult, not extremely difficult, but definitely a lot more challenging than a more linear campaign. And that's something to be aware of. But it's also like what makes it so cool is that there are so many interlinking events and relationships and challenges. It makes it feel like a real world with like real people interacting with each other. Awful people interacting in horrible ways with each other, but yeah, it makes it feel very dynamic and alive. But yeah, let's talk about the ending now.
Yeah, as we said, this has one of the strongest endings of an adventure path or a campaign, published campaign that I've seen, because as we've said before, you know what the final confrontation must be, and it gets all Phantom of the Opera-y, and that you have to go and, at any time you want, go confront the vampire Baron Strahd von Zarovich. And yeah,
that's right.
You have to fight him. There's no way around it. You can't leave, and you can't do anything else until you try and confront Strahd.
You know exactly where he is because the Taroka cards have told you, and if you've done it right, you have all the tools that you need, these artifacts that will help you defeat him, and by the end, you should know his whole dark history, which is a lot more gruesome and tragic than it appears, and you may find him like somewhat sympathetic, but undeniably evil, which is what you're supposed to find. And this also gives you like a chance to like really like meet him face to face and have him, do his big bad villain speech at you. And yeah, your players should be ready to throw down by the time you get to the end of the campaign. And yeah, you go to the enormous mega dungeon of Castle Ravenloft, and depending on how motivated and focused your players are, they may have to, range through the entire thing, or potentially just laser-like focus, go right to the room that Strahd is in if they can find it and fight him there. But yeah, it is such a satisfying conclusion to the campaign, I think.
There's a satisfying final confrontation with a villain you know and hate or love as player characters. And I think it's got a great, strong ending. After the end of the campaign, right, if players have been wanting to get out of Barovia, right, they can leave. My one critique of the end of the campaign, I don't know if you share this or not, Rob, is a lot of adventure paths, I think Paizo's adventure paths do this really well, is that they give dungeon masters about 2 or 3 detailed pages of options for continuing the campaign. I know from my perspective, it's hard to continue I don't think I desire to continue a Curse of Strahd campaign after Strahd is dead. However, there are still some interesting hooks that if players really love their characters and wanted to keep playing this campaign, that you could follow, and the published material doesn't give you any suggestions for that.
I agree, and I do think that this is a missed opportunity. It does feel like a fully completed arc, but it would be nice to have a hook or two or a little bit more about like what to do after or what happens after.
Yeah. It is a perfectly completed arc, but one of the basic things about a role-playing game is that the adventure never has to end unless everyone wants it to.
Right. I agree with Matt that I think this is a missed opportunity because there are unanswered questions, and there are some, loose ends to deal with that, that could be turned into a further adventure, and that's not there. But yeah, that's, I think, my only main critique from a DM's perspective. For experienced players, it is almost impossible to make that's not true. Not impossible to make Strahd challenging, but it is difficult to tune him correctly. He has a lot of very powerful and unique abilities that, if not properly managed, can be overwhelming to players. But he also is just one person up against 4 to 6 players, and like anything, that is going to be a massive advantage to your players.
5th edition tries to get around this, but nothing can really get around that. If you have a squad of 4 players or more versus 1 creature, 4 players are going to have an advantage. You can easily get around this by making, if you want to make things really difficult, have some of Strahd's subordinates in the room with him, or have him use one of his special legendary actions to summon some more creatures immediately.
Yeah. I'm very happy with how the final confrontation went down.
In your campaign.
in my campaign, my players dealt with him pretty handily, but I think he was, it was challenging enough. He could have been more challenging, and definitely consider adding some allies to help him survive a little bit longer. But the other thing is that, like, if your players have prepared correctly, they have all these extremely powerful artifacts, and it should feel earned, because there are plenty of very hard fights on the way to Strahd. So it doesn't necessarily mean that he has to be a, deadly, extremely high stakes fight. That's okay if, that he shouldn't be a pushover, but it's all right if they have prepared and they know what they're going into, for them to slay the vampire at last, because in a sense, the whole campaign is a battle against Strahd.
Every fight is just tapping that stake a little harder into his heart. Now, if you wanted to, let's say, add some suggestions for Dungeon Masters of ways, because you're only at level 10, which is, a good place to end in 5th edition, if you ask me. But if players want to keep going after level 10, do you have any suggestions on how to continue a horror-themed Curse of Strahd campaign?
Yeah, well, this is going to get into a little spoilery territory, but there's the hint of dark powers in Curse of Strahd. Strahd made a deal with these ancient dark gods to get his vampiric powers and become Lord and Master of Barovia. And I think that a great way to continue the campaign would be to hunt down and eliminate or defeat either the more powerful followers or these dark powers themselves. And I can think of a few ways to do that, but that seems like the obvious next step.
Yeah, and a great way to sort of shoehorn that in is saying, Strahd was drawing from these dark powers, and with him gone, they are free to move directly into the physical world, right, or something like that.
Another good thing to do would be some sort of quest to purify or restore Argynvostholt. It requires possibly, I don't know, like a planar jaunt, or like, recovering an artifact of a silver dragon from a distant land that will take you to higher level areas.
Right. This is a time to break out the actual Ravenloft campaign setting.
Ooh,
I
yes.
think you get that from the Dungeon Masters Guild, in which Barovia is but one valley of many horror-filled Gothic lands. And you might have to go to the next valley over to get that thing.
I can imagine one that a heavy draconic campaign from 10 to 15, 10 to 20 that involves a lot of difficult adventures to restore Argynvostholt, to purify its memory and cleanse it of the taint and corruption that it required while being under Strahd's thumb.
Is this the only Dungeons and Dragons campaign that I've played 10 levels of where I haven't fought a dragon? It might be.
Ooh.
That
is so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not even a Dracolich or a Draconic Skeleton. I don't think there were any.
That's so funny.
There's maybe some dragon statues, but wow, no dragons.
Oh, no, you fought wormlings.
Oh, that's right.
You did fight baby dragons, but no, there were no even young adult dragons. I would add if I were doing this again, I would throw a Dracolich in there somewhere, maybe in the Amber Temple, just for funsies.
Yeah, okay, that's some great ways, Rob. Great advice to continue this campaign. Any final thoughts or criticisms of Curse of Strahd, recommendations for people?
No, I think we've covered everything. It is challenging for both DMs and players in some ways, but as long as everybody wants to play this type of game, it is very, very fun. So I fully recommend it. I recommend reading it before you play it and get a feel for it, but it requires a lot of work, requires a lot of prep and buy-in, but it is I think this is possibly not my favorite, but one of my favorites by far. It was I usually play and run like grand sweeping sort of open-ended campaigns, which I like, but it was very nice to have one that had a beginning and an end, and that felt very satisfying to reach that end.
Yeah, the basic takeaway is, if you can get your players to buy into the idea of a Gothic horror campaign, then there's no reason why you shouldn't run Curse of Strahd. The other thing I would say that players and DMs should be aware of is the role of the Vistani, which are a human ethnicity or culture group is very central to the campaign, and the Vistani are basically fantasy Roma or fantasy travelers. And they're not really presented in the best light. It's kind of shitty. This could be reworked.
A legacy of They're portrayed as thieves and allies of Strahd, and I'm not sure this they are sympathetic Vistani, several, and
yes, many.
And I tried to play them as flawed but generally likable people, and I think I did a pretty good job. But be aware. Well, you're not wrong. I'm glad you brought this up. Be aware that this is D&D has done a good job of purging a lot of its bad stereotypes, but this is one that has a bit of a legacy. So,
I mean, especially when we're looking at, Western European nations, looking at you, Italy, calling for, basically a census as like possible prelude to, ethnic removal of Roma in their country. It's sort of it's a bad look, Wizards, to have this sort of portrayal.
So if you're gonna run this, I just there's plenty of Vistani. Take a look at them. Take the opportunity to make them a little bit less of the way they are. They can still be like allies with Strahd. They can still be kind of not friendly with everybody, but think about how they're being portrayed and maybe lean away from that.
Yeah.
All right.
Hell yeah.
Well,
Strahd. Curses.
Strahd. It's great.
Vampires.
You love vampires. You love horror. It's a lot of fun. It was great to be able to run this and reflect on it. Maybe next year after we've run another one, we'll do it again. But this was a great experience for me and everyone. And hopefully, if you decide to run this, your players will like it as well. But thanks for listening, everybody. And we will we'll see you all next week.
Ta-ta. Keep rolling them dice.
Keep rolling them dice.
Curse us out. I want to suck your blood.
Got no future, great big past. Little bitty guy on the rim of my glass. And gotta meet the plane so I can get my monkey. Teach him to be cool but a little bit funky. Got no credit and I got no fear. And I got about $1 so I can buy a beer. Gotta see a doctor about the words I've said. And I gotta get a bike and I gotta paint it red. Oh no, we gotta go.